Before we go back to Mr. Perkins, where I suspended, I just want to go through the new requirements or the additional requirements for our microphones for avoiding feedback. Bear with me, folks. Remind everyone, meeting participants in the room, following important preventative measures. Prevent disruptive and potentially harmful audio feedback. Incidents that can cause injuries. All in-person participants are reminded to keep their earpieces away from the microphones at all time, which I haven't been doing. As indicated in the communique from the speaker to all members on Monday, April 29th, the following measures have been taken to help prevent audio feedback incidents. 1, all earpieces have been replaced by a model which greatly reduces the probability of audio feedback. The new earpieces are black in color, replacing the old gray ones. Please make sure you only have a black one, black approved earpiece. All unused earpieces will be unplugged at the start of each meeting. When you're not using your earpiece, please place it face down on the middle of the sticker for this purpose that you will find on the table. Please consult the cards on the table for guidelines to prevent audio feedback incidents. The room layout's been adjusted, as everyone can see, to increase distance between microphones and reduce the chance of feedback from an ambient earpiece. These are taken to prevent injury to our very valued and very important interpreters. So we are resuming on the amendment. Mr. Perkins, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome back, everyone. Just as a reminder of those who are perhaps tuning in for the first time, what we're discussing here, and that is that the Conservatives put forward a motion this morning to release contracts of the main players where the government has signed large taxpayer subsidies for EV battery assembly plants, mainly assembly of parts that are made in China for Volkswagen, Stellantis, Northvolt, and as well the latest on Honda. Although Honda, I understand, is an MOU. It's not a formal contract the way the others are. And for a while, we've had a number of players, both within the company, from the Korean government, stating that there are two phases. There's the construction phase to the Stellantis contract and in the Volkswagen case, in Windsor in the case of Stellantis, and St. Thomas, Ontario in the case of VW. And then there is what's called a production subsidy contract, a separate contract which subsidizes the production of every battery paid or produced in those plants, the production subsidy being every battery, the taxpayer will pay a certain percentage of the cost. And as we know, in the public statements and releases that the Liberal government has done over the last year or so on some of these contracts, they've claimed both that the construction jobs and the jobs that will be permanent in the plants will be Canadians. And this process around the Stellantis plant actually started in the fall when the South Korean ambassador went to Windsor, saying that in total they were trying to make sure that there was room to house 1,600 workers involved in both the construction and a portion of them involved in the permanent running of this facility from South Korea, not Canadian jobs. And that's out of a total of about 2,300 construction jobs and supposedly 2,500 jobs at the Stellantis plant once it's open. And the cost of those plants is quite large. $15 billion is the estimate for the Stellantis plant in Windsor of taxpayer money going into the production subsidies once they're producing batteries, and $500 million of taxpayer money going into the construction of that particular facility. And in the case of Volkswagen, it's $778 million into the construction, and again, around $16 billion into the subsidies of the batteries that will be produced there. And so members of the government have accused us at various times, whether it's in the House of Commons or whether it's in this committee, of making this stuff up. But this all started from the South Korean ambassador saying that we need a place to put 1,600 people. This isn't something that we made up. It's indeed what he said. His Excellency on November 11th of 2023, sorry, November 16th of 2023, this is a quote from a newspaper article, and Chief Belair and the members of the Windsor Police Service were honored to be visited by His Excellency Ambassador Woong Song Lim and his colleagues from the Republic of Korea with the new LGE Energy Solutions battery plant being built. We expect approximately 1,600 South Koreans traveling to work and live in our community in 2024. So this isn't one, as was claimed initially by the government, or just a few, as some of the Liberal MPs claim. Then again, you know, back in as far as August 18th last year in 2023, I'll give you this quote from one of the local business development people. Quotes, LG asked us to put together a group of local developers and investors to present their needs for the next generation, next 1 to 3 years, said Invest Windsor Essex Vice President of Investment, Attraction and Strategic Initiative, Joe Gonzalez. Quotes, they're expecting from 600 to 1,000 workers will be coming to set up equipment, and another 300 to 500 people will be coming from LG to run this facility. He said specialized workforce was needed to set up the half-dozen buildings on the Nexstar battery plant site, and they will come from South Korea. There will be a lot of need for housing, he said. They wanted to let the community know early what the numbers would be and the types of housing and workers will require. Now, I don't know about you, but over the years, off and on in my interaction with governments, and I did serve a few years in the dark ages for the Foreign Minister of Canada in the Mulroney government, I never met, or rarely met, a diplomat that freelanced, that went out on his own making stuff up. They usually went at the behest of the government and the businesses. So for those who said, well, this is nothing, I don't believe when you say, you know, more than $15 billion of taxpayer money is going into an auto plant, that of the 2,300 construction workers and the similar amount of supposedly permanent workers once it's open, that 1,600 of them are going to be coming from South Korea. That's what started this whole controversy last year. Now, the government disputed that, and we began a process in December in this committee asking this committee, which examines government expenditures, asking for the release of those contracts. And the reason we asked for it in this committee is because the construction had already started. The money had already started being spent in the Stellantis case on the construction. So the $500 million of taxpayer money was already going into that. And officials from the Korean government were saying something different than what the government was saying publicly. The head of Nexstar at one point actually verified that those were sort of the numbers. It'd be up to 600 or so to 1,000 people coming in from Korea to oversee 600 local construction workers. And again, in the House, one of the Liberal ministers said there'd only be one work permit issued, and then Subsequently, we learned that that in addition to what the ambassador had said, on the ground things were clearly much different than what was being told by the government, by the Liberals, about what was happening in the Stellantis construction, and hence the letter dated April 10th. Not that long ago, to the Prime Minister from Sean Strickland, the Executive Director of the Canada's Building Trade Union, condemning the Prime Minister for the clearly lax contract that was allowing this to happen. In fact, in his letter, he wrote the following: "We are writing to request your personal intervention." And subsequent to this letter, or prior to this letter, the Prime Minister had actually had a visit there. But we're writing to ask for your personal intervention to resolve the ongoing use of international workers in the construction of the Stellantis Nexstar EV battery plant in Windsor. And they go on to say, there's a few paragraphs here, that they had been negotiating, talking, trying to work with Stellantis to get an MOU to ensure that good local tradespeople, Canadian tradespeople, were being used and hired for the construction, their responsibilities as a construction phase, but that their best efforts had not borne any fruit. In fact, he says, despite our best efforts at a negotiated resolution and without public or media commentary, in other words, the union went to Stellantis in good conscience and good all due respect to say, let's have a private conversation about making sure that what we're seeing doesn't continue in the hiring of workers that were doing non-specialty jobs that were coming in from abroad when there are 100, according to the union, 180 tradespeople in their union unemployed looking for work that could qualify for these jobs. So they said, we're not even going to go to the media. We're just going to try and have a legitimate, good business discussion. But in spite of that goodwill, LG and Stellantis continue to use international workers through subcontractors for work which our members are ready and able to perform. Goes on to say, as I mentioned, 180 local skilled trades workers in Essex, Kent region, millwrights and iron workers are underemployed and in some cases unemployed and available to perform this work. In fact, Canadian workers are now being replaced by international workers. That's what the letter says from the union. The Canadian workers are being replaced by international workers at an increasing pace on work that had previously been assigned to Canadian workers. So what the union's saying here is that there were actually Canadian tradespeople working on the site, but they've been replaced by people from outside the country, otherwise known as a foreign replacement worker displacing Canadian unionized trade skills people in helping to build this plant. And they say 50 more, as of April 10th, they were expecting 50 more additional international workers expected to arrive and begin work that was previously indicated was to be performed by Canadian workers. That's right in the letter to the Prime Minister. So apparently what the government is saying publicly is not what's happening on the ground. And the union goes on to say Canadian workers are being sidelined without consequence, no penalty. Government's putting $500 million of taxpayer money into this construction. It's okay if you take Canadian tradespeople out of the construction of this and replace them with people from South Korea. And I'm told, even through some sources, sources through the union, is that some of them are actually on the ground or coming from Mexico and not South Korea, and replacing in not specialty jobs. These are jobs like forklift operators or general construction. They're replacing them. In fact, the union goes on to make the accusation that that this is a slap in the face to Canadian workers and utterly unacceptable, particularly as they recognize when the shareholders stand to benefit from more than $15 billion of tax incentives from the Canadian government. So just so people watching understand what that tax incentive is, it's in response to a bill that President Biden passed through the U.S. Congress called the Inflation Reduction Act, which actually spends a lot of money. Spending money actually doesn't reduce inflation, it increases it. But the misnomer of the bill aside, it sets out the subsidy that they would pay, that being the U.S. taxpayer, for battery assembly of EV batteries in the United States. And it sets out that any batteries made between now, when a contract is signed last year, I shouldn't say made, they're not made, they're assembled, because over 90% of the parts for EV batteries currently come from China, helping out that economy. And they get assembled here in Ontario and then are subsidized between now and the end of 2029. Guess how much? How much do you think the taxpayer would be reasonable that the taxpayer would pay companies that have more revenue than the government of Canada subsidize the assembly of Chinese battery parts in a EV battery in Canada? I can tell you, I'm seeing puzzled faces around the committee table. The answer is 100%, if you can believe it. So between now and the end of 2029, in some things in life, occasionally somebody asks me a question, and I say, well, twist my rubber arm. Twist my rubber arm. I think, twist my rubber arm. Why don't you come here and set up a battery assembly plant where you can bring in foreign replacement workers, and the Canadian taxpayer will pay 100% of the cost of that assembly? Well, gee, that's a tough business decision to make when that means that the battery, and I don't know if people who are watching understand this, the battery in an EV takes up 30 to 40% of the manufacturing cost of any EV, 30 to 40%. So in other words, between now and the end of 2029, the great negotiating skills of this Liberal government see 100% of those costs being borne by the taxpayer, meaning 100% profit for these auto companies that are larger than in revenue than the government of Canada. Now, if that's not enough, I know in the Volkswagen case, for example, that I'm not sure that this is the case in Stellantis, but in the Volkswagen case, Volkswagen doesn't assemble any cars in Canada and has no plan to. And so Volkswagen's going to put all those batteries on a truck and ship them to their plant in Tennessee, assemble them there, and sell the cars in the United States. So let's put it another way. The Canadian taxpayers are making sure that Volkswagen gets a clear 40% profit on the sale of their EVs paid for by the taxpayer of Canada for cars that will be assembled in the United States and sold in the United States. 100%. Now, not to be outdone, of course, they didn't want to take it too far, so in 2030, the contracts in the IRA, which these mirror, makes that 30 down to 75%. 75%. So there's a bargain. So Volkswagen and Stellantis only have to cough up 25% of the cost after 6 years, 5 or 6 years of manufacturing batteries. After all of that, they then do 25% of the cost, and then wait for it, in 3031, it's 50%. So we're shortly getting to a parity thing here, and then in 2032, finally, they're paying 75%, but the Canadian taxpayer is still paying 25% of the cost of those batteries. And somehow, the Liberal Minister of Industry thinks that somehow he negotiated a great deal. But this is a great deal. That if it wasn't for his efforts, Volkswagen and Stellantis wouldn't have been willing to come here to have the government of Canada pay 100% of the cost of assembling the batteries. Like, I guess maybe they must have been asking for 110% of the cost, and he got them down to 100%. Way to go. So that is the basis of this. So even in that extreme, we've got the union writing and saying, even in that extreme, you don't have to employ Canadians. So they say, on the ground, the real experience, not as some of the local MPs have claimed, the real experience the union is putting in this letter, that these are not about knowledge transfer, these construction jobs, or specialized knowledge. It's a brazen displacement of Canadian workers, the union says, in favor of international workers by major international corporations, thumbing their noses at both the Government of Canada, taxpayers, and our skills trade workers. For our members in Essex-Kent, the current state of affairs is intolerable. As such, the Canadian Executive Board has authorized us to use all necessary measures required to remedy the situation. So what happened after this letter went to the Prime Minister and they started to kick up a fuss and threaten to go to the media? Well, LG, Stellantis, they said, oh, well, let's sit down. Maybe we could have another chat. So my understanding is they did. And it resulted in what kind of MOU between Stellantis and the Building and Trades Union? My understanding is none. None. Zero. So the issue continues. And the issue continues because the government's now claiming that the one job is now 72 jobs only, so it's okay. So as it escalates, I don't know, maybe the government can answer, what's the acceptable level of foreign replacement workers that would justify this? It was one, apparently, that when that didn't turn out to be true, they decided that it would be 72. But the union says in their letter there's another 50 coming. Now, let me understand here what's going on in terms of this. If you don't think the union is right, and for some reason that the union has an agenda that's different than the Liberal government, there are these jobs, postings, all over the place. These are not specialized jobs. Material handler, Korean.
And Mr. Perkins. Mr. Massey, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, Mr. Perkins. It'll be real quick. It's just the Building Trades Union has issued a statement and a letter to me and also put it up on their social media, I believe, saying they do not want the motion to proceed. So I wanted the member to be aware of that. But I do appreciate his intervention. And sorry, I just wanted to make sure that's on the record. So, and I'll read that into the record at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Not a point of order, but always appreciate an intervention. Mr. Perkins, go ahead.
I appreciate MP Massey's intervention. I know he's worked hard on these issues, and but I'm just quoting, unless they're denying that they sent the letter, I'm just quoting from their letter. So, I'm citing Government of Canada job postings. There's a Government of Canada job bank, and this is on the Government of Canada site for Windsor. Says there may be some overtime for this material handling by Gel Special Canada Inc. They're one of the recruiting companies being used by Nexstar to recruit it. It says here, who can apply for this job? Other candidates with or without a valid Canadian work permit. You don't even have to have a valid Canadian work permit. You don't have, I can tell you, having read the Stellantis contract, you don't even have to be a Canadian to get the jobs. There is no clause in the contract that requires that. Nexstar here, and I went through it this morning. I said about this general affairs. This is Nexstar. That's their logo there. General affairs specialist, basically an office management administrative position. Says it requires fluency in Korean. I don't know how many, and perhaps I should know this. I don't know how many fluent Korean unemployed people there are in Windsor, but apparently that's what's required to work at the plant. There's another one for a general affairs specialist on the website by one of the job things. Jalal here says for this one, again, material handler, Korean is needed. And in order to speed things up and not read all the jobs that were listed, here's some highlighted ones. As I said, a general affairs specialist requires fluency in Korean, electrode quality engineer, bilingual in English and Korean, module production planner, English and Korean proficiency, and it goes on. You know, process quality engineer. These are not specialist jobs. These are not specialist jobs. We have office managers in Canada. We have office managers in Windsor. And so, you know, if I gave the benefit of the doubt to the government, which I tend not to do because they seem to have been either not reading it. When I asked the minister months ago in committee if he had read the VW contract, basically he said no. And when you sign a $15 billion subsidy contract, I think you would sign it, especially if you're a corporate lawyer like he is. I wouldn't imagine he would give any client advice that says, don't sign the contract, don't read the contract you're about to sign. I don't think that's a legitimate legal advice that I've ever heard a lawyer give. I don't know, maybe the government says other than. And so this is why we're here having this discussion. And when you look at it, there's page after page of the Nexstar itself in media saying one thing and changing their expectations on the other. I talked about some of the quotes from the Windsor Star. There are quotes from Nexstar where they said, no, there's no foreign workers. Well, maybe there's a few. Well, maybe there's 600 in the construction. Maybe there's 600 in the permanent jobs. Maybe there's none in the permanent jobs. But, you know, if the company's confused, no wonder Canadians are confused. Because if the contract was not confused and said in the contract, Canadian workers only, maybe even Canadian union workers only. I know that doesn't apply to the MOU with Honda that's been signed because they're not a unionized auto business, but Stellantis is. And it seemed like a pretty obvious thing to put in the contract for both the construction and the permanent jobs. Canadian union jobs only, not Canadian residents, because anybody could be a resident. Anybody can come here from Korea, come here from Mexico. Now I'm a resident. Now, some have claimed that that's what it may or may not be there, that it says Canadian resident. Canadian resident isn't Canadian citizen or permanent resident. It doesn't say Canadian job. And clearly the company and the ambassador are thinking something very different. And because this issue has been out there quite a bit, and we had the famous one on Honda recently, announcement last week where Honda was asked, why didn't you get a production subsidy? He said, well, because the government said they had run out of money. I think that's the first time I'd heard the federal Liberals say they had run out of money. Didn't look like it in the budget with a $40 billion deficit and no sight of balancing it. But when they said they had run out of money, but we'll give you between us and the Ontario government, $5 billion of input tax credits. So a plant that is, what I understand it, much bigger that Honda is proposing, producing more batteries than what either of these two plants do combined, will actually cost a lot less than the subsidy that is in the contracts for Stellantis and Volkswagen. So, you know, if they were out of money now, why weren't they out of money when Volkswagen came knocking or when Stellantis came knocking for Volkswagen's deal and said, sorry, we don't have that kind of money. Well, we can do some input tax credits, but we're not going to do that kind of thing. If you want to come here and get access to our critical minerals, access to our excellent workforce, access to our well-educated, well-trained workers, and eventually create a supply chain for EV battery manufacturing parts, come on down, we'll give you some input tax credits. That's a tax credit for actually making something, for building it. But it doesn't cost anywhere near this 100% battery subsidy. But I guess when the political pressure came along, after the first two on the foreign replacement workers, the government finally said, well, I guess maybe either the government said, I guess we got to do this differently, or the Minister of Finance said, well, I don't know what she said. I can only borrow $40 billion this year, so I can't add any more. And I've only added $800 billion to the national debt, so I can't borrow more to subsidize companies that are larger than the government of Canada. So we'll only do input tax credits at, it looks to me about half, maybe even less than half of that. Now, they'll still get, I'm sure, the accelerated capital cost allowances that the Liberals put in previous budgets to pile on top of the 10% tax credits for this. But we've heard, including question period today, when I asked the minister the question, and he energetically defended bad deal after bad deal and said that somehow I was spreading disinformation. I had actually read the contract, and he admitted he hadn't, but I was spreading disinformation. If he had read the contract, and I asked, just release the clauses then. Just release the clauses from all the contracts that will deal with jobs, And let's see the clauses that prohibit foreign replacement workers in those contracts. Release those. I challenge the minister, and I challenge Liberals, as I did in the House today. If I'm wrong, release the contracts, release the clauses. Prove me wrong. I'll admit I'm wrong if you release the contracts or the clauses and show me that it guarantees that only Canadians will be working at these, both at the construction and at the permanent jobs at this. And the Liberal Party ran holier than thou-ish in 2015 by saying disinfectant is the best sunshine to show what's going on in government. But time after time after time in this committee and other committees, the Liberals have refused to even admit that what the ambassador from Korea was saying is right, refused to acknowledge that what the union is saying is right, refused to say, I'm sorry, you're right, we should have provided more specific language in the contracts, and but we'll work on it, we'll set up, maybe we'll go back and do an amendment. They've got to make sure that they're there, because of course the company's claiming they want to hire Canadian workers when they write to committees here in Parliament, but then they turn around publicly and allow foreign replacement workers in. So I don't know if that's misleading Parliament or not when they submit letters to this committee and others claiming they're hiring nothing but Canadian workers and then do the opposite in reality. Perhaps they don't know the consequences of what misleading Parliament is. Might ask the owners of GC Strategies how that feels. On this issue, I would love to be proved wrong. I would love the Liberal members to prove me wrong. I would love them to prove me wrong. Release the clauses in the contracts. Show Canadians that you negotiated a contract that requires Canadian workers only. Show it to us. That's all. Show us the money from that famous movie. Show us the money. Show us the money. Put your money where your mouth is, that you're saying it says this. Then release those clauses. Release those clauses. But they haven't been willing to. And again, I remind people, even if I ever hadn't read the contracts, that they haven't been willing to do that, which tells you in itself that they're hiding something. But since I have read the contracts, I know that those clauses are not there. I can't talk about what's in the contract, but I can talk about what's not there. And what's not there is a Canadian job guarantee. It's not there. So, Mr. Chair, I think that there is ample evidence that we continue to require these contracts. I personally would like to have officials come, but that we release these contracts or any element of the job clauses that are in them. If you're afraid that somehow it lists in the contract the number of batteries that somehow is, or that there's some sort of proprietary technology that's covered in these contracts that, Stellantis or Volkswagen doesn't want their proprietary battery technology displayed. You could redact it, but I can tell you, having read the contracts, there is no proprietary technology clauses in the contracts. There is no technology clauses in the contracts. There is nothing to that end that's in the contracts. It's not there. It's not there. In fact, when we got to look at the Volkswagen contract, the only thing they redacted was the number of batteries they thought they might produce every year, but it took a grade 12 student about 5 minutes to figure it out from the other numbers. And they redacted the construction schedule for some strange reason. It was odd. They redacted the construction contract. But everything else was there. And as you would expect in any contract the government signs that is supposedly commercially sensitive, the signatory, the private sector company, would have the ability, you would think, to have a clause in there that says, hey, before we release any contract publicly, or any part of the contract, because we're dealing with the government, so we know that some things have to be made public if you're going to take taxpayer money, that somehow we get a shot at deciding what parts of that contract get released to politicians and the public and what's not. I would expect that those clauses are there. I don't think that this committee would ask that the government abrogate those provisions that are in the contract that allows them to do commercially sensitive. And I think that's why MP Massey, before Christmas in his motion before this committee, was suggesting a third party of some sort to arbitrate that and figure out what should be in, because not that we don't trust the government, but a third party like the law clerk of the House of Commons, or I think MP Massey suggested the privacy commissioner, or was it access to information commissioner? But some third party say, okay, the company has said these things are commercially sensitive. Let's have a fact check, a reality check from a neutral body like the law clerk or the access to information commissioner to see whether those are truly commercially sensitive or whether it's just playing politics because somebody negotiated a bad contract and didn't want the job clauses released because they're vulnerable. And so we all expect that. We all expect that those terms, if they exist in the contract, would be respected, but we'd want them, trust but verify, I think was the intent of MP Massey's motion, that we do that. But the government hasn't even been willing to do that. The government's not even been willing to say, okay, Volkswagen, Stellantis, tell us which clauses you don't want released to Canadian taxpayers, and then we'll have a third party look at it to make sure that the government isn't playing politics. The government hasn't even been willing to do that. I think that's a reasonable request, too, but that's been rejected. So here we are, once again, and we keep getting these issues in spite of this. This could have all been solved in December, when these motions were being discussed here, by doing as MP Massey had suggested. Excuse me a moment. But we didn't. So here we are again, where you actually have foreign replacement workers coming into Windsor, and you actually have gotten to that obscene position where they're taking Canadian workers off the job site who are not in specialized Korean secret sauce. Our battery is this, and therefore we have to have special technicians with, you know how when you take your car in, sometimes if you have a relatively new car, they say in the garage, if you take it to your corner garage rather than dealership, said, Rick, I like to repair that, but you have to take that into Volkswagen because there's a special tool to undo that part. The right to repair legislation. You've got that person and that interest. So it's a bit of a monopolistic game that car companies play because, of course, nobody can buy that tool unless you're a dealer. So it forces you to go pay twice the labor rate at a dealership than you would pay at your local garage. That type of thing, saying this is the guy with the specialized tool for the specialized machine in Stellantis, would be the guy that needs to be installing this because they have a special training. That's not what the union's complaining about. The union recognizes that. I still don't know why you would need 1,000 of them out of 1,600 construction workers, why 1,000 of them would need to be that. But that's not what the union's complaining about. The union's complaining about forklift drivers. And the government's doing other ones here on the permanent jobs as they get ready for these plants to open that have absolutely nothing to do with specialized requirements and skills. There is no special requirement other than the experience somebody has in Canada to be an office manager. Yet that's what they're advertising for. So I would encourage members now, and I've probably gone on as much as MP Kamirchik did before. So I will conclude here, but may come back on the issue that we need to have that disinfectant sunshine that the Liberals all knocked on doors saying we needed in the government by releasing these contracts. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Perkins. Mr. Sousa and then Mr. Massey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And yeah, it's shocking to hear yet again a repeat of what we went through only a few months ago, talking about the sensitivity, the competitive nature, the proprietary information that's at hand, releasing some of these informations, which the member opposite has just admitted to having reviewed one of the contracts, and notwithstanding the duty of confidentiality that he's obliged to, he's yapping on about stuff that's not in the contract, inferring about what should be in the contract. Recognizing, of course, there's other competitors at play, there's other matters of confidentiality.
Sorry, Mr. Sousa.
Sure.
Excuse me. Go ahead, Mr. Perkins.
I would never refer to the former finance minister's dissertation from Ontario as yapping, even though he delivered poor budgets. So I would ask him to use more respectful language. Thank you.
Point well taken, there were actually 6 budgets. One that I did twice, I have to say, and I balanced the budget. And the one that I did twice was actually the one that gave us a majority government going forward. But the matter that the member has suggested, I do apologize for using that term. But the gums were going so much, and you didn't take a drink, and I was just a bit concerned about you. I'm glad you're relaxing a little bit now and enabling yourself to take a bit of a rest. And I'm not going to go on too much more here, Mr. Chair. We have already discussed the sensitivities of these contracts, the breach that's essential that we do not breach some of the confidential aspects that entails and enables us to compete against other jurisdictions around the world. And it's also a matter of reputation for Canada to enable us to be a secure partner in these endeavors. And when it comes to jobs, I'm going to allow our colleague from the NDP to elaborate further upon some of the very discussions he's been having with members of the union, who only days ago has been tweeting out that they appreciate and support the work that's being done and looks forward to enabling that contract to take fulfillment so that we can then elaborate more clearly as to what's engaged. And we can dissertate some of the other issues that have been issued by chambers of commerce and elsewhere, who are cautious and very distressed by the engagement that has been had in OGGO, and some of the members in this committee trying to advocate for an open and transparent aspects of the contract that then puts at risk the deals as we go forward. We all want to safeguard jobs. We all want to ensure that Canada succeeds. We all want to create innovation and investment in industry, and that's exactly what we're doing. And it's unfortunate the member opposite doesn't appreciate that, or the members of the Conservative Party, for that matter, don't seem to appreciate the necessity of us being at the forefront of these issues. So I'll stop there, Mr. Chair, and I do look forward to getting a better understanding of what the union is actually saying in regards to this contract and these investments that are being made in Canada.
Mr. Massey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to my colleagues, and thank you, Mr. Chair, as a guest back at committee here.
Oh, I apologize. Welcome back.
Yeah.
To OGGO.
Thank you. Unfinished business. And I'm not too terribly surprised that we're back here to some degree. I think Mr. Perkins, he's been on this file for a long time, not only just at this committee, but also at industry, and raises a lot of valid concerns and points. And I think that comes because we don't have a national auto policy that's kind of transparent, something I've been after for a long period of time. So it's like we have had in the past some of that structure that's missing. And so however these deals are different, creates questions and concerns that are out there. And obviously the building trades union has had some discomfort recently, issuing a letter to the Prime Minister and also in general out there. But I did reach out to them today because that's why we're here with this motion in front of ourselves, and with their interest in mind. And currently right now this doesn't happen with their support because they feel things are sensitive at the moment, and they do appreciate. I'm going to read their statement that they sent to me, so it's on the record. Canada's Building Trade Unions is aware of the ongoing discussions at OGGO. While we are pleased that all parties are concerned with Canadian unionized jobs, we do not believe it is in the interest of our ongoing discussions in pursuit of MOUs with global automakers for such an expansive production order to be proceeded with at the current time, while sensitive negotiations are being undertaken. Our preference would be to revisit this issue in 1 month and allow all parties to conclude negotiations. That's from Sean Strickland, CBTU. So, and I've also been on the phone with them as well, with Nathan Carr from them as well too, to get an idea. They have their convention going on as well too, and they've had to advocate for their workers in a strong sense. And it's been very frustrating, I think, for a lot of, not only just elected officials, but of course the workers that have had lost hours of employment as they've tried to negotiate, and sometimes it hasn't gone as well as it should have. But keeping that in mind, they have said that they would revisit this issue at Industry Committee by issuing a letter to the chair at the appropriate time when negotiations are concluded, or if there's a problem in the future that's necessary for our attention. So with that, I hope that, I want to withdraw the amendment for the NDP at the moment with regards to this. We don't need that. We don't need it to go to committee right now. We don't need the motion right now. So for me, I hope we can get to a vote because their convention is going on right now, and this is another distraction for them at the moment. They've had to advocate strongly for their workers, and I don't think they don't back down. I mean, you've seen the letters of the Prime Minister. You've seen the letters, and their members have been outreaching us, and I want to thank them for advocating strongly, because public dollars are very important, and they're very important, especially if we have to renew our sector the way that we have now, and accountability is everything. So I trust it in their hands. And I take my advice from them. They're at the table at the moment right now. And I think that we need to be supportive, all members of Parliament, with them to actually exercise their strength at negotiations at the moment, not undermine them from one way or the other. So with that, I won't be supporting the amendment that we have. I can ask for unanimous consent to withdraw the amendment. And then also, too, as a main motion, we won't be supporting as well, too.
You're taking away the work of the bargaining unit by doing my work by asking for a UC. Shame on you, Mr. Massey. I assume we have a UC then to withdraw the amendment. Right, it is done. We are back to the motion itself. Are you done? Yes. Okay. Colleagues, are we ready to go to a vote on this? On division? Recorded vote? Perfect. We'll do a recorded vote. Sir?
Mr. Baines? No. Ms. Taylor-Roy?
No.
Mr. Sousa?
No.
Mr. Mao?
No.
Mr. Kuzmarczyk?
No.
Hey, it was closer than yours, Charles.
Mr. Brock?
Yes.
Mr. Perkins?
Yes.
Mr. Leslie? Yes. Madame Vignola?
Wait.
And Mr. Massey?
No.
6 nays, 4 yeas.
Folks, it is defeated. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate everyone's politeness as we debated and talked. If there's nothing else, we are adjourned.